time to look at the month ahead for June, even though to a lot of us it seems like it's still March, the 100 days of March continue. But of course, the challenges of these last few months have increased and continue to do so. And we know, even without the benefit of astrology, that there is still a lot more to face in terms of challenges and what the pandemic crisis might bring. Certainly, as we know, it looks like at the ground level, not terribly much is changing, but as ever, behind the scenes, a lot more is. Looking at these big cycles that I've been speaking about this whole year, which we hold responsible for the epidemic crisis, the cycles of the difficult planets Saturn and Pluto, and being joined by the kind of aggravating factors of the planets Mars and Jupiter, we can see again a lot of activity amongst those cycles in the next month or so. And just like in the early stages of the epidemic in March, we also see a lot of sudden rapid development during the course of the next month. That means, as we know, that we are going to see a lot of increase of numbers. Again, that's just part of the facts. That doesn't need astrology to tell us that. But certainly what's going on around that might be what's significant. From the chart's point of view, it looks like the increasing frustration and sometimes anger of some of the population is increasing. And one of the things we do need to watch out for is some level of civil unrest. Things begin to reach a peak in the early stages of June, probably in response to the limited shift into lockdown level 3 and the frustration and disappointment by some who are either not getting lowered into lockdown level 3, or if they are, perhaps it doesn't bring some of the freedoms that people are hoping for. And it certainly looks like there is no reduction in the levels of anger and frustration and opposition, or growing opposition, to the lockdown. Certainly from opposition parties themselves. So hopefully we're not talking about the kind of civil unrest that has people marching in the streets, but is rather civil organizations representing civil society and organizations such as political parties in opposition are all beginning to make an increasingly loud stand. It does look like the opposition parties are beginning to band together in their opposition during the month of June. And for the president, things are reaching ahead in the first and second weeks of June. I've often said how he plays his cards close to the chest and we don't really know what he's thinking or doing. We now have begun to understand some of the political limitations on his power at this time, and this is becoming extremely evident and critical in his chart at the moment. It looks like he is fighting a battle on two fronts, not only in terms of everything he has to do with the epidemic, but also in his own party, and forces are mounting against him that reach some kind of a crisis point around the 6th of June or so, somewhere around the end of that first week of June. It's a little bit like we just got to get past that point and perhaps he's in better control. But this is more than even before a kind of a do or die action moment for the president. He has the ability to act with will and free will, and this is one of those times that requires extreme courage, not in the same way that we've seen in the months of having to apply the lockdown, but now we're talking about in terms of dealing with his party and the very serious opposition and power play he faces within his party. In fact, perhaps if the circumstances were not so different, this would be seen as a very direct threat to his presidency and an attempt to undermine it, or indeed even remove him from the presidency that is coming from within his party. What it looks like is that it's almost as if the president's voice is being muzzled in some way. And we know that there's a lot that he's not able to say because he isn't the one who's fully in charge of the disaster, but there definitely seems to be some a process where he's actually unable to say what he really wants to say. And this is where his moment of courage is called for. What the stars say for the president this month is dare to speak up and dare to speak out. That is what's going to change things. It's time to stop being so circumspect and so politically correct. Sometimes one needs to push against one's own envelope and remember that you are the president. And so it's time to actually speak with power and change the conversation that way. So certainly at the political level, this is the most critical time for Ramaphosa in the whole pandemic crisis. And he's going to have to act with power. Basically, he needs to show his power. It also looks like at the global level, there is increasing crisis around this time. You know, as I've said before, astrologers often spoke about world war, which would appear in 2020. And we saw all these countries in crisis and massive aggression and war-like behavior as a good old-fashioned war. Well, nothing good about them, but certainly as war. And many people have compared the COVID crisis to war, and it has many, many of the same characteristics. So certainly astrologically, it is enough to explain the cycles that we've been seeing. But that doesn't mean the chances of real actual war are gone, and they certainly are looking a lot more serious in the month of June, and that will also spill over into July. We will see more saber rattling from President Trump of the United States, and there is increasing tension and potential aggression between America and China that is by no means resolved or even fully played out. There's going to be a lot of escalation in the war of words, at the very least, between America and China, and perhaps in ways, certainly economic war and Cold War, and there is still a chance of real war or some form of actual aggression between them before the year is out. And so that chance is very escalated over the weeks of June and July. Much of the crisis is what escalates. We will see numbers increasing dramatically here around that same end of the first week of June and into the second week of June, and that will continue throughout, which means that we're going to continue to have arguments and battles about lockdown and what should change and what shouldn't. And that whole frustration between the people, the opposition, the premiers, and the government themselves continues to escalate again into the second week of June. So there is this point, which is around the lunar eclipse of the 5th of June, that things hinge around, that will itself bring a wave of more crisis, and then after that, in the later parts of June, hopefully more effort to resolve it. But it's going to continue through into July, where the battle against the virus, the battle against each other, and battles out there in the world reach their maximum levels. It's still going to take a couple of months after that before we see a turning point in the epidemic crisis itself. But certainly for the month of June, we've got to knuckle down, and perhaps more than just lockdown. It's now about knuckling down. It's trying to contain ourselves. And mostly, you know, when people say, what can I do about all these high levels of things like governments and premiers and oppositions who are all increasingly in conflict and making the month of June look pretty scary, well, there is something you can do, because as we know, a lot of the level of aggression has manifest amongst ourselves as the ordinary people and on social media and elsewhere. And people are fighting and breaking friendships like never before. We can de-escalate a lot of the violence by starting with ourselves. It's often said that change happens at grassroots level, and that doesn't always mean we have to go into the streets and march, which would escalate the violence or the aggression, but that we can start in our individual relationships and our individual connections, our social network relationships and our real relationships, to make a very conscious effort to reduce anger, aggression, to avoid the argument. It's not important to be right. It's not important to answer. It's not important to put forward your opinion, really, if that means it's going to lead to some kind of aggression. Under normal circumstances, sure, we know that we love to have opinions and it's important that we are free to air our opinions, but we do need to be sensitive to these critical forces combined with the lunar eclipse that are all coming together during the month of June, and we need to go carefully and with love and with compassion for each other. Aries, a lot has been said about exercise and the lack of it and everything else about it during the course of the lockdown. But one way or the other, whether you find yourself locked down or not, you actually need to make sure that you get rid of some of this pent-up energy. Your month is all about dealing with pent-up energy. Apart from the obvious lockdown energy, the frustration of many other things seems to suddenly have added up for you. And the bottom line of a lot of that is that you actually haven't had chance to have fun, to let it all hang out, to let your own energy express itself. So that's what June is all about for you. Some people will, of course, find themselves working, able to go back to work. A lot of energy is going to go back into that, and it does look like actually you might be working harder than you need to, which under the circumstances you've got to do. It could be a great way to release energy, because your theme for this month is all about find ways to release energy, but most importantly to also make sure that it's done as self-expression out of things that you love and things that you love to do. That will give you a lot of relief and get you back on track. Taurus, it does seem as if you need to do a bit of rebuilding in some relationships, and that doesn't mean that necessarily anything has gone wrong. Just means that this is a great opportunity to restructure, to renegotiate, to take a different approach, especially in long-term relationships. This is time for a bit of a renegotiation of that contract. Over the last while, you've had lots of opportunity to find out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Perhaps some of you have been locked down together and you've learned that way of what doesn't work for you, maybe engaged in some unnecessary battles because of that. But really importantly, the renegotiation can save the day. You're actually in quite a strong position this month in terms of knowing what you want and knowing what's working for you. And in the final stages of being completely locked down, that's the thing to clarify for yourself. I know what works for me. I know what doesn't work for me. I've learned a lot about myself, and I need to bring those into my relationships. In any way, this is a great time to change what's going on in their relationships, because some Taurians are going to find all new people coming into their lives and new relationships beginning. So it's going to end up as quite a social time for you that will bring you back a lot of your confidence and what you really care about in your life, which is people. Geminis also have a month of negotiation, but this is a month when you really are being heard. It's a great opportunity to be heard at any level, and that's much more important in terms of getting out your goals, and also any goals that you have that are about putting your ideas into the world. Whether that's publishing them out there, Geminis often like to say things and write things and make things and put out their own ideas quite literally, or in any situation where you have problems to solve at work or elsewhere. This is the time that you're really going to be able to make your input make a difference. You will find that if you're born around about the 5th of June, and anyway for all Geminis, around that time of the lunar eclipse might be a time of conflict or misunderstanding, or even just not feeling so great. The eclipse is happening in your birth month, so you actually need to take probably a bit of a step back around about that 5th, 6th of June, just late around that time, and not try and be heard at that time. But for the rest, the stars are singing your song. They're supporting you. Things that you need to happen in all your relationships, especially the ones that matter most, money and love. The stars are singing with you. You're going to be heard. Say your piece. Cancerians might not be so ready to emerge from lockdown or their houses or wherever they've been holed up for quite some time. But of course, this is a time that you're going to need to use to re-establish some connections. It does look like you've lost touch with a lot of people during this last period, both for the obvious reasons as well as perhaps some withdrawal into yourself. And this is the time to make those reconnections happen, especially with your close one-to-one relationships. This is a time that those connections can be rebuilt. Sometimes you're going to have to actually make some changes in order for those connections to be able to rebuild, to be rebuilt. So make use of some of what you've learned about yourself and by being isolated over the last while in order for that to happen. It does look like all kinds of partnerships are working well for you, and that means financial ones where you need some kind of input from others, or anywhere where you need some kind of input from others. That's especially great for people from far away, for foreign connections, for overseas connections, and so on. So look far and wide, reconnect, and discover what's available to me through all these amazing people that I actually know. As Leos start putting themselves back into the world, whether that means you're able to go back to work and get out of lockdown, or whether your own work, your creative work, your art is perhaps finally able to go back out there, but you're going to find yourself in rather changed circumstances, and that is going to require some thinking out of the box. In fact, this is a fantastic opportunity for really creative thinking, but you are going to have to be persuasive. It looks like you've cooked up something new during this whole time we've been hiding behind our front doors, and now you just got to find a way for the world, or your working environment, wherever this is, to accept it and understand what you mean. So this is the month you need to say your speeches, get your sweet tongue sharpened up, and be very persuasive, because your ideas can really go a long way at this time, especially since it looks like you might be having to talk someone out of something, and persuade them otherwise, as well as perhaps persuade them to give you what you need. So it's a month of persuasion and persuasiveness for you. But the end result is your ideas are going to fly. Virgos will also find all their connections with people, both friends and associates, people you know and people you don't, are going to be very beneficial for you. This is a great time for every kind of negotiation, especially the kind that requires cooperation, working with someone or getting someone else to support whatever it is that you're trying to do or what you need to do at this time. Things will go really fast, and you'll make a lot of progress in fulfilling those goals if you're able to be out there in the world. If you find yourself still locked up and one of the ones unable to move at this particular time, the stars really emphasize how important friends and people around you are at this time. You might even find that you've neglected some of your friendships and let some fall down by the wayside over the last couple of months, and this is the time to re-establish those connections. It's not just about during lockdown we phone all the people we know, but it's deeper than that. This time it's about phoning the people you didn't phone during lockdown and just making those connections strong again, because over the next few months all your connections are going to be a great source of what it is that you need to fulfill your goals. So make that connection. Libra, this month it's really about the whims of fate. Now it seems as if the whims of fate have been playing havoc over the last couple of months. That's probably true. But what I'm really referring to is that no matter what you're trying to do or what you need to make happen or what you're able to make happen at this particular time, fate seems to have other plans. And you're just going to have to chill and realize this is a great month for practicing letting go of what I'm not in control of. What you do need to be careful of, and why this comes up in your chart this month, is that interpersonal conflict is easy. It looks like either you're more sensitive than usual or perhaps you've just had enough, but whatever it may be, there's a high potential for some kinds of conflict. And it really means you need to find somewhere in your life where you're able to express your will and your power more directly, because that's coming out in your relationships and that's where all the trouble is coming from. So find something that's yours, that no one has any input over, and put all your energy into that to let off a lot of steam so that you make sure that your relationships are carefully managed at this time. Keep silent even when you want to answer back, and you'll find a much more peaceful month ahead. Scorpios, this is one of those times where it's like you know what you want to do, you're ready to do it, and you've kind of got everything that you need in order to do that, but somehow you're not. And holding yourself back, being diplomatic, or not wanting to cause a fight or anything like that, generally are good characteristics, but this is just not the time. This is the time when you're going to have to act with some forcefulness, some strength, and actually get your will out. That's what's really important at this time, is for it to be a selfish time. In fact, for some Scorpios, this will be a great opportunity to do things that you love and do what you want to do. And that's also of high priority in order to balance yourself, to give you the courage and the comfortableness in order to be a bit more assertive elsewhere. You actually need to have some opportunity to do that, whether it's on the sports field or in gym or somewhere where you easily feel confident and powerful. Take that back out into your world. You're going to need it. But if you act that way, you can cut through many barriers and put many of your plans in place in this month ahead. Sagittarius, in many ways over the last month or so, it's been kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. You can't go left, you can't go right, you can't go forward, and you can't go backwards. Whatever the actual lockdown might be doing to you, it might feel like in many ways you're locked down at the moment. So the best thing you can do is draw on the support of the people immediately around you. Family members, friends, other loved ones around you, all of that can be a really great source of support and help at the moment. That's really going to work for you. It's also a good time to kind of regroup yourself, bring back some of your thoughts and ideas and so on from before the whole epidemic crisis happened, and get yourself back on track in terms of your own goals. It's probably going to be a little while before you can really put anything into practice. There certainly seems to be a lack of flow going on in your chart at the moment, but gradually over the next months that's going to improve. So you're not in control of the things that are blocking you. Best is to let go of those, chill, don't sweat the small stuff, appreciate where you are, draw on that, and that's what's going to make everything work for you. Capricorn, there remains a lot of frustration in your chart. This doesn't have to get the better of you at this time. If you make a concerted effort to focus yourself and not let your rebellious spirit come to the surface, because that's what seems to be happening at the moment. Because you're naturally a leader, you do have an underlying rebellious spirit, despite the fact that you tend to respect the rules of the world around you. And that's what you seem to be brushing up against at the moment. What you do need to be aware of is that the people around you are watching you. Friends, neighbors, etc. look to you for a certain amount of guidance. So all the more, this is the time to maintain that cool, calm Capricorn demeanor and keep on going as you are. In your own domestic environment, it looks like there is a lot of frustration going on, and there's only so much you can do to release that. But if you get the chance, this is a great time to be literally working on stuff around the house, literally changing what you want to change and thinking of new ideas of how you will be able to go forward when the time comes that you're allowed to. There are two things happening in the chart for Aquarians. For some Aquarians, you really need to change where you're at if you're in a space that is not your own. This is a time to actually change the environment around you as much as you can. If that's not possible, given the circumstances around you at the moment, then the best you need to do is to understand how the environment is affecting you, the physical environment you're in, and make some kinds of plans to change that, because that's where a lot of the problem lies. Other than that, for the other Aquarians, this is a time when finally your space really feels like your space, and you may never want to leave the lockdown situation, which I know sounds a little bit extreme, but not quite as extreme as that. But it's like you've really found your space in the world, and one of the things you've learned over these past few months is how to create that space. So whether it's actually your space, or whether that's made you realize the space that you're in isn't it, this is the month when you sort out finally, what is my domain, what is my kingdom, and whatever you can do to establish that, you're putting yourself into a very strong position for the rest of the year. Pisces, you are also one of those focal points for mounting frustration. You're a person who often would do nothing about that, but after a little while it's going to happen. That eclipse around the 5th of June might be a bit of a turning point for you. So much so that you need to actually watch out for a little bit of unnecessary aggression or provocativeness that will make you feel awful afterwards, being the Pisces that you are. So wind that back in, that sense of power and strength that will come around about the time of the eclipse and thereafter should be put into activities that benefit you, whether it's about things that you love or getting a chance to pursue goals. All of that's going to be possible in the last 2 weeks of the month of Gemini, 2 weeks starting from the second week of June. So until then, you need to really manage yourself, bide yourself, be careful not to lose your cool. At the same time, not to feel overwhelmed or melancholic or frustrated and allow that to lead to any kind of melancholy and depression. It is going to shift. So for the next 2 weeks, be kind to yourself, build your energies, realize I am going to do something about it. Second week of June onwards, I'm really going to make things happen, and a lot of that frustration will dissipate. Looks like we're all getting a chance to try and put a better version of ourselves out there. I'll see you next week at the same time.